Ready, set, ready? All right, welcome back. I'm registered dietitian Myrna Haag. My goal is to bring you impactful nutrition information that can significantly change your life. What I really want to talk about is obesity and reversing it. And the main thing with obesity, what a lot of people don't realize, it's a big chemical mayhem. A lot of times people think, well, I'm overweight because I don't have the willpower, or maybe I just don't exercise enough. And I'm here to tell you that it has to do with how the body chemically works with food and without food. What I want to talk about in this video is leptin resistance and how that affects your appetite. Because bottom line, if you lose the desire to eat, you lose weight. That's when you get to your leanest weight. You get to your leanest weight and you reverse most diseases. 75% of all diseases are due to obesity. So if you can control the weight, you literally reduce the disease. So the key with this is to understand that if you can get the appetite to where you lose the desire, which is what all these Ozempic, these drugs that reduce your appetite, these weight loss drugs, that's all they're doing. They're not guaranteeing you're going to be healthy. They're just getting into the brain, the appetite center in the brain. They're blocking some of these receptors. And this, folks, is how we get the appetite to be less. And we can do it naturally without spending $2,000 on drugs. So the one chemical I want to talk about in this video is leptin. And I'm going to make the video shorter. I got some feedback. It's like, okay, an hour. Can we do it in 30 minutes? So Sam, you're going to help me with that because we're going to try to get you the information in less time because you guys have lives to live. I get it. So Sam, if you'll take me to the PowerPoint, let's get moving. So what is leptin resistance? It really comes down to what, number one, is it, the definition, and how does it affect us? This is a brain chemical. It is a huge factor in obesity, even cognitive decline, fertility. We'll talk about some other health issues related to this leptin resistance. But let's get right into the definition. So what is leptin? It's a hormone that regulates hunger. Leptin signals the brain that the body has enough energy. Therefore, you decrease your desire for more food. It's a natural appetite regulator. And this is crazy because if we have one of these, then why are we overweight? When leptin is elevated, the body stops eating. It's just not interested in food. Leptin comes from fat cells. So when fat cells have had too much fat, they release this hormone that goes to the brain and signals in the appetite center for you to decrease your desire for food because you've got more fat cells. The body says, well, more fat cells means that you have more energy needs than desired than what you need. So let's just have it where you don't want to eat as much. And that makes perfect sense because ideally the body would never choose to be obese. It's highly inflammatory. It's really so highly associated with most diseases. It's not the path of least resistance. Let's face it, to be obese is hard work for the body. So it makes no sense that the body would have this, mechanism to make you fatter. In fact, it has mechanisms to make you leaner. It has switches that turn off your appetite. So it's made in fat cells when fat cells are enlarged, when you have too many of them, when insulin is released, and insulin gets released when you're eating more food. So as you eat more food, the body's going, okay, we're eating more food. We want to make sure that there's a switch to turn off the food because we certainly don't want this person obese and more inflamed, sicker. No, we want them healthy and lean. Also, a small amount of food in the stomach can signal it. So basically, as you're eating more and getting fatter, your body is releasing a hormone to create this balance, this feedback loop, so that you will be able to have an appetite switch to turn it off. Now, what's also interesting with this hormone, it helps turn fat into energy. It plays a role in cognitive function and memory and learning. And it also signals the brain for ovulation. It prepares the uterus for pregnancy. So when leptin isn't working like it should, these are some areas that are going to get affected. So why is it then do we have a problem with obesity if we have this natural switch, this hormone that regulates our appetite? After all, when we have low leptin, it signals the body to eat more. So in other words, when fat cells are too skinny, if there's such a thing, but when you have less food in your body, maybe you're fasting, maybe it's been a long period since you've eaten, that hormone leptin is low, and sure enough, it's signaling the brain to eat more. Now, if you're really overweight and obese, even if you've had some fasting and you're low in food, the leptin is still going to be elevated and you won't eat as much. So that's great. Wow, that means as I get fatter, then I should be on my way to being leaner, right? I should eat less the next day and the day after, because my fat cells are releasing this hormone and it's helping me get down to my leaner weight, which is going to be my healthier weight. So elevated leptin actually signals the brain to eat less. Low leptin, eat more. That's pretty simple. So that's a great thing. So what is going on? Why is it that we are having what's called, let's go to leptin resistance. What is it that is not allowing this hormone to work? It's because you make plenty of leptin. Maybe you are overweight. Maybe the insulin is releasing at a high level. So you're making all this leptin, but the brain doesn't recognize it. That means that the receptor sites that are on the brain, this is the hypothalamus, this is that energy center in the brain, and the receptor sites are being blocked. They're resistant. Something is stopping that appetite switch from turning off. You're creating plenty of leptin, so there's plenty of leptin in the bloodstream. But the receptor sites that leptin attaches to in the brain that will switch off the appetite, well, those receptor sites are blocked by something else. So leptin is unable to get in there and do its job. So therefore, it's resistant. Plenty of leptin, but the brain chemical is unable to get the message to turn the appetite off. So the leptin receptor sites get blocked. What causes leptin resistance? Insulin resistance, which I'm going to explain that, high-fat diets, excess body fat. Now, we talked about excess body fat. As you're getting fatter, it's signaling to the body, hey, we've got a lot of energy already taken care of here. We don't need more food. But with excess body fat, we also release inflammatory metabolites. So just because we're getting fatter, it releases immune cells. And it's actually these inflammatory immune cells that can also block the leptin receptors in the brain and cause leptin resistance. So here it is. You've got plenty of leptin circulating in the blood, but we have other factors that are causing the receptor site to not function like it should. You can also have some mutations in the leptin itself and chronic inflammation. Now, chronic inflammation is going to be highly tied to excess body fat and also insulin resistance, which we're going to get to next. So, let's summarize. Elevated leptin doesn't mean a doggone thing like it should. But when you have leptin resistance, even though you have elevated hormone to switch off the appetite, it's not working because the receptor sites in the brain are being blocked. And what is blocking them? Too much dietary fat, and we'll talk about the implication of this. and increase inflammation from body fat. So as you get fatter, you actually increase inflammatory cells, and then a condition called insulin resistance. So what causes leptin resistance, what causes the appetite switch that can keep you lean to be dysfunctional and keep you fatter, are these three main areas which we're going to talk about. And what happens is you have no appetite control when you have leptin resistance. Also, it contributes to other appetite increases in other hormones. We're not going to talk about those other hormones in this video, but we will in other videos. Because bottom line, you control all of this. You can get your appetite back. You don't have to take a drug to open up that hypothalamus, that appetite center. We can actually do it through knowing how to eat, knowing actually what causes it and how to do things that don't cause it. So when we look at fat cells, the fat cells, as they grow, they release the leptin. The leptin then goes to the brain and tells the brain to stop eating. We don't need more food because it seems like you got plenty of food stored in fat cells. But as you get fatter, the other thing that takes place is the fat cells themselves also create a recruitment of inflammatory immune cells. So as these fat cells do what fat cells do, they start creating TNF, interleukin 6. These are just some immune cells that actually begin to circulate because fat cells, as they enlarge, and you have more number of fat cells that are getting larger, the evolution of a fat cell, how it works is this in itself is a chronic inflammatory condition. Fat, excess body fat creates this. These immune cells that are created because of excess fat can also cause a clogging, a receptor site in the brain cell that's supposed to turn off the appetite to not allow that switch to happen. So these immune cells can also cause this excess insulin or leptin resistance to take place in the brain. So that means that increase in obesity, although increasing in fat cells should be turning off the switches when you start getting too much excess body fat. It actually increases leptin, which is good, but it can also cause a feedback loop that can enlarge the fat cells, increasing these immune cells through the enlargement of the fat cells that can cause the blocking of the brain cells, the receptor sites that hopefully you want to be turned on to turn off the appetite don't work. So these immune cells cause other metabolites that literally block these receptor sites. So when you look at the hypothalamus, this is the appetite center in the brain. There's several chemicals that are going on that can either create more of an appetite or less of an appetite. So our appetite is actually in the brain, but we do things in our lifestyle that can affect the appetite center in the brain. So it's really tough to stay on a diet when you have your brain telling you want to eat more, which when we take these diabetes medications, they're going in and blocking some of these receptor sites like peptide Y and some of these certain dopamine is another one, certain chemicals that can turn on the appetite. These actual drugs can sit on the receptor sites that don't allow these to turn on. Leptin is one of those chemicals in the brain that is responsible for appetite. And it gets affected because we're eating a diet too high in fat. We're eating too much dietary fat. We have something called insulin resistance, which I'm going to explain now. or we have too much inflammatory cells. So let's talk about insulin resistance and how this affects leptin. First of all, what is insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is the precursor to type 2 and type 3 diabetes. What's type 3 diabetes? It's Alzheimer's. It's really type 2 diabetes in the brain. How it works is when you eat carbohydrates, it breaks down to glucose, and what glucose is wanting to do is get inside a muscle cell to provide energy, getting inside the brain cell to help you think clearly. So this glucose is going to the muscle cell, and in the process, the pancreas releases the hormone insulin. And what that hormone insulin does is it begins to circulate in the blood as the glucose increases to go to the muscles and attach to a receptor site. Now, we have receptor sites on all our cells. That's what lets things in and out. Just like with leptin, we have a receptor site in the brain for leptin. We have a receptor site on muscle cells, also on brain cells, for insulin. Insulin attaches to that receptor site, talks to a messenger, talks to another messenger, and brings the transporter up to the surface of the muscle cell. This also goes on in the brain cell when insulin attaches to receptor sites in the brain. And what happens is that glucose is allowed to go into the muscle cell because of the transporter. What happens with insulin resistant is this receptor site becomes clogged. Same with leptin resistance, where the receptor site in the brain becomes clogged. This one also becomes clogged because of excess fatty acids that accumulate in the muscle cell. These excess fatty acids can come from too much body fat. So now we're seeing the relationship where you can have excess body fat because body fat releases excess fatty acids. These fat cells that actually become enlarged, they release these fatty acids that circulate into the bloodstream, and in excess, they go into the muscle cell and they change and become a type of fat called a ceramide. And at the end of this video, I will show you some videos where I actually go into detail about insulin resistance, but it's excess fatty acids that come from excess fats, from eating too much dietary fat, or from your fat cells that are just too enlarged. You have too many fat cells. And this literally clogs this receptor site, and the transporter does not come to the surface of the cell. So what happens is insulin begins to build outside the muscle cell. And when this happens, the body releases more insulin. When this happens, you actually will get an increase in appetite. And this begins the whole problem with metabolic disorders. Insulin resistance gives a real problem to obesity because as you become more insulin resistant, meaning that insulin cannot do its job, it's resistant, that receptor site is being clogged with too much excess fatty acids. Well, the same thing with leptin resistance. When we see insulin resistant, we also see a high association of leptin resistance. They go hand in hand. Could it be because some of the same culprits involved in insulin resistant are also involved with leptin? Well, I would believe so, because also with insulin resistance, we have these dysfunctional fat cells that are releasing a lot of fatty acids. We also have excess fats, just eating way too many dietary fats. Dietary fat is good for you, but in excess is not. So basically, this is a problem with our diet. We're getting insulin resistance, which is highly associated with the same clogging of the receptor site in the brain that also helps with this leptin, part of these appetite control centers in the brain. So when we have leptin resistance, we have insulin resistance, we have these receptor sites that are supposed to do their job. For leptin, it's supposed to control your appetite. With insulin being insulin resistant, it's actually supposed to control the glucose. It's wanting to get the glucose in the muscle cell where it belongs. When glucose can't get in the muscle cell where it belongs, then glucose goes into the fat cell. And that's where we begin to get even fatter. So this cycle then begins to become what I call the obesity cycle. All because we're having an issue of not understanding how to eat correctly. Excess fats can create this problem. They accumulate in the muscle cell. And it's also related to leptin resistance, which controls your appetite in the brain cell. The other problem with this is it creates a type of fat called a ceramide. These ceramides can actually leave the cell and get into the blood, and they can cause other damage in other areas. Heart, kidney, they can also cause problems in the pancreas, leading to type 1 adult onset diabetes. So there is an association between insulin resistance and leptin resistance. Insulin resistance makes you heavier because the sugar goes into the fat cell. It actually makes it harder for you to get sugar into the muscle cells so you can have low energy. And it contributes, highly associated with also leptin resistance. So it makes it even harder to control your weight because now your appetite's affected. So insulin resistant is a culprit for leptin resistance. Same with excess dietary fats, too much fat. And we'll go to some studies that show that as well. Bottom line, University of Cambridge, they show a beautiful slide, and they're basically showing how these fat cells and also excess insulin, all these things that get defected can control our appetite through this leptin, through this chemical in the brain. So let's go through some of the studies and talk about just some of the implications involved. And then I'll come back and kind of do a summary on this. So when we have leptin problems, right? And we also probably have some insulin resistance. It's harder for us to control our weight. All these things are going on. We're gaining more weight. We can't figure out why. We can't lose it because we have, we're hungrier. So all of this is a chemical mayhem that's going on because the body's in this imbalanced state. But it can also cause fertility complications. So if you're overweight or if you're underweight, these two scenarios are going to really address leptin. If you're overweight, well, then that means that leptin is, you may have this leptin resistant. So being overweight, the body sees it as low leptin. Even though you have plenty of leptin circulating in your blood, you can have a situation where you have leptin resistance. And it's almost as if you have low leptin because the brain's like, well, I know we have leptin, but I'm not getting the message that I actually have leptin that's giving me the switch to turn off your appetite. So being overweight can almost have the same effect from a hunger standpoint as being underweight. Because when you're underweight, you have low leptin levels, and that triggers the brain to have you eat more. Overweight, you can have leptin resistance, which triggers the brain for you to eat more. But the thing I'm getting at in this slide is it has other implications. And in the Fertility Institute in San Diego, these doctors talk about how leptin communicates directly with the reproductive system about the body's energy status. It's crucial for the reproductive health because it informs the brain if the body has enough energy to support a pregnancy. So bottom line, if you have leptin resistance, you can have some infertility issues, right? So what they're saying here is high leptin levels, which we will see with possibly obesity, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, that this can actually cause this problem, and it can contribute to polycystic ovary syndrome, another common cause of infertility. Also, if you're underweight, there can be a problem with fertility. So it seems like overweight, because of this leptin issue, can cause a problem with fertility. Also, too much underweight. So that to me was interesting, because it's directly tied to the fact that leptin, this appetite center in the brain, controls other areas in the body. This study talks about how it can contribute to increasing type 1 diabetes. It can also affect the neurons in the brain. It can affect your mood. It can affect anxiety and depression. And I think the best slide to show you on that is, I'm going to go back to this slide, that with the, when I look at the pathway of how leptin works and how it can be blocked by certain chemicals. This chemical comes from just having too much excess body fat. It blocks that receptor site, so the signaling actually doesn't take place. But if you go further down the path, you will see that it's also related to serotonin, melatonin, that's helping with sleep. Serotonin helps with depression and mood. Certain antidepressants can also have an effect on the hypothalamus of the brain. They can actually increase your appetite. So a lot of these chemicals that we even take in drugs can also affect the appetite and can affect our moods. So and affect our sleep. So I wanted you to see that leptin is tied into some of these other hormones that affect not only our appetite, but our mood, our brain chemicals in other ways. So the reason why I think this is so important is that we want to reverse leptin resistance. We want to reverse insulin resistance. So a lot of these areas, if you're having them, like depression, in its mood, behavior, these kind of things can actually hopefully be corrected. So when we look at other implications involved, it affects cognition, it affects the cardiac cells, liver cells, pancreatic cells. So when you have inconsistencies in these metabolic disorders, because that's what insulin resistant is considered, a metabolic disorder, because it affects your metabolism. That's what leptin resistance is. It's a metabolic disorder because it's affecting your appetite. And all of this disorder, specifically when I look at leptin receptors, this affects other areas. It's like a domino effect. So the key is we want to reverse this. We want to figure out, how do we reverse leptin resistance? Because low leptin increases your appetite, like fasting, being underweight, low calorie diets. So you do a lot of low calorie diets. This can have a boomerang effect, a feedback loop, because you're going to start dropping those leptin levels. Or if you lose a lot of weight too quickly, this can drop those leptin levels. And for the next 6 months, you have this replenishment where the body's trying to bring you back up to those higher levels, because leptin is a chemical that can do that. It can actually increase your appetite when it has these other triggers going on. Or sadly, you could be overweight and just have a resistance where the leptin is elevated, but it can't tell the brain. So it's the same thing as having low leptin. You actually have the same effect, an increase in appetite. So the brain's not getting the signal. This can happen from an increase in inflammatory cells from being obese. So yes, as you get on a diet to lose weight, you lose body fat, you can actually lose the inflammatory cells that are implicated with leptin resistance in the brain, because that's one major cause. Insulin resistance. This is all about understanding how to eat a balanced diet. And I have a course. That's all I do is teach you how to manage your macronutrients to be able to reverse insulin resistance. And then chronic inflammation. The more inflammatory cells you have, the more of the link that we see with leptin. Also, a high-fat diet. And Sam, if you can take me to that video, or to the, I'll let you take the mouse and take me into, there we go. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about this study. See if I can have the mouse back. There we go. Thanks. And it talks about a normal diet and high-fat diet, and how when mice are fed a high-fat diet, they produce an enzyme named MMP2 that clips the receptor for the hormone leptin from the surface of the neuronal cells in the hypothalamus. Remember, neuronal means the brain cells. Hypothalamus is the appetite center in the brain. This blocks leptin from binding to its receptor. This, in turn, keeps the neurons from signaling that your stomach is full and you should stop eating. Because what triggers the appetite for you to stop eating is you're just getting too fat. So fat cells will release more leptin. You're eating too much food. The stomach will say, oh my gosh, we got all this food. Let's not go for seconds and thirds. Or an excess amount of insulin can do that. But when you have insulin resistance and insulin doesn't work like it should, or when you're just eating too many fats, that in itself can cause this appetite defectiveness. And I think that's super important, because I know everybody's big on eating a lot of fats because everybody's afraid of carbs, because of the fact the carbs they think cause type 2 diabetes, which it does not. It's actually these excess fats. And it's very strange for me to, talk about the science, because it's not what you're used to hearing, but you really need to do some of the homework and fact check me, get into some biochemistry, and I can show you where to do that. And you can see for yourself that the science behind some of this is really understanding that a lot of appetite is controlled in the brain, and a lot of that is controlled in how we eat, right? So it all comes down to nutrition. So I want to go back, Sammy, if you'll take me back to my PowerPoint, and we will go to the summary. I do have a couple YouTube videos for you to watch. Sugar does not cause diabetes. Their previous streams. If you go on live, you'll find them. They can just go to the YouTube live and they get it there. Also, type 3 diabetes, which a lot of people are shocked. They've never heard of it. But that is Alzheimer's disease. I think that video is worth watching. And I really get into the nitty-gritty of how this whole pathway works. Now, it's tied into your appetite. And that's the biggest thing I wanted to get for you to get to in this video. Is your appetite is controlling you getting the seconds and thirds and, not being able to stay on a diet. It isn't that you have willpower that's lacking or your time. It's really that these brain chemicals are not helping you, okay? And with leptin resistance, very tied into insulin resistance, when you go to my video, I talk about how to reverse it there. But leptin is your appetite control center, and it is being controlled with this insulin resistance, with fat cells that become inflamed, and a high-fat diet. Those are some of the main culprits that can affect your appetite. And I know when I talk to a lot of my patients, and I talk about the appetite centers in the brain, and I talk about these receptor sites in the brain that are very responsive to high fat and high sugar. High fat and high sugar in the diet, the excess of those two affect the appetite center in the brain. And this is just one example with leptin. So I hope this helped. I tried to stay true. I tried to cut the videos down so that you guys can get in and get out. Give me some feedback. Let me know. I think it's super important to bring you this information because honestly, the control button is with you. Understanding how nutrition works, understanding how food works is really the ticket, not the drugs you're paying $2,000 worth. Your body chemically can keep you at your leanest and healthiest weight if you know how to do it. And I do want to give a plug. You can go to myrnamethod.com. I have a program. You join my membership, and I do a podcast only on this. How do you do the Holy Grail? What is it that you do with your macronutrients that really gets you to your leanest weight? And it's a course. It's a course because I have to teach it to you. I have to teach you how to eat so that you know how to get your body to do it chemically naturally, which the body will do. Okay, so I think I got it all in. And by the way, love your feedback. Let me know because this is for you. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for you. So you let me know how I'm doing, how you want me to do the information to bring it to you. I'm all open. Yep, and topics. Although I really think, yeah, bring them the topics. I can do it. I was going to say I'm trying to be impactful with some things that I know will really crush obesity. I mean, that's just kind of like things super important because we can. That's the ticket. It's not about willpower. It's about chemicals and knowing how they work in the body. Okay, so let's go to the chat. Do we have any chat, Sam? No chat today. Okay, guys, thanks for joining. Let me know. Hit the like button and subscribe. Do all the cool things that...
And you've hit 400 followers.
400 followers. Wow. Super excited. Thank you. Thank you. Like I said, I'm doing this for you. Let me know how I'm doing, how you want me to bring more information in areas that you might think is super important. Otherwise, I'm going to be fighting obesity for you. All right. Good. Sounds good. Thank you.